Ever read the name Edgar Allan Poe and instantly think of horror stories, dark poetry, and a raven that just won't shut up? We all know the books, but not the man behind them. Who really was Poe as a child? What strange obsessions shaped his twisted imagination? What secrets hid in his personal life? And why did his death remain one of literature's darkest mysteries? Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 in Boston, and let's just say the universe really set the tone for his goth kid future. His parents? Both struggling actors, which in those days was basically one step above being a street magician with a drinking problem. His dad bailed when Edgar was just a baby, and his mom died of tuberculosis before he could even remember her. Edgar Allan Poe's real dad, David Poe Jr., who basically pulled the classic vanishing dad move. He abandoned the family in 1810 when Edgar was only about 1 year old. What makes it darker? No one really knows exactly what happened to him afterward. Some accounts say he died around 1811, possibly from alcoholism or illness, but historians don't even have an exact record. The man just disappeared from history like he rage quit fatherhood. So basically, Poe's dad ghosted him before ghosting ever existed. So yeah, Poe's childhood was less happy family photo album and more tragic origin story. He technically had two siblings, but they all got scattered like mismatched socks in foster care. Edgar ended up with the Allens, a wealthy family in Virginia who took him in but never officially adopted him. Imagine being the permanent house guest, but instead of snacks and Wi-Fi, you get constant reminders that you're not really one of them. At school, he was the classic smart but broke kid. While his classmates had fancy clothes and spending money, Poe was that guy borrowing paper and wondering if lunch debt was a thing in the 1800s. One fun fact, he was actually athletic. He ran, swam, even joined the military later, which is hilarious when you remember most people picture him as a pale, broody vampire scribbling poems in a candlelit room. Edgar Allan Poe wasn't your average sad poet in a basement stereotype. He was more like the OG walking contradiction. On one hand, he was ridiculously charming. People said he had this magnetic presence, like he could talk his way out of debt, which he often had to. On the other hand, he was moody as hell. Imagine a guy who could make you laugh at dinner and then write a short story about your corpse before dessert. That was Poe. Now here's where it gets weirder. Poe was obsessed with cats. Not just liked them, obsessed. He thought cats were mysterious spiritual beings, and one of his cats even sat on his shoulder while he wrote. Creepy pirate vibes, but make it literary. And you'd think, a writer known for darkness lived like a total recluse, right? Nope. Poe was actually super competitive. He'd roast other writers publicly in reviews. Absolutely savage takedowns, which made him hated in the literary world. Some people legit described him as both a genius and a troll. Unknown facts? Okay, here's a good one. He was so obsessed with cryptography that he'd ask readers to send him coded messages, promising he could solve them. He solved nearly all of them, flexing his brain like it was the 19th century version of hacking. Another? Despite writing some of the bleakest stuff in history, he had a sense of humor so dark, it made people uncomfortable. One friend recalled him joking about death at parties like it was small talk. Poe's higher education was basically a short-lived disaster. He went to the University of Virginia at just 17, which sounds impressive until you learn he spent more time gambling and drinking than studying. He racked up so much debt that his foster dad, John Allen, basically ghosted him financially. Imagine being broke, addicted to booze, and owing money in the 1800s. When debt collectors weren't just sending emails, they were showing up with sticks. After that, Poe tried the military life. Yep, Edgar Allan Poe in uniform? Let that image sink in. He enlisted under a fake name, Edgar Perry, because apparently the military was easier to scam than his foster dad. He actually did okay at first, but then realized discipline wasn't really his thing. He ended up at West Point, one of the strictest military academies in America. And what did he do? Purposely got himself kicked out by refusing to attend classes or roll calls. It was like he rage quit the army. Job hunting? also a disaster. Poe's career before writing full-time was a montage of chaotic temp gigs. He worked as an editor, but here's the catch. He couldn't keep a single position because he'd either fight with the staff, insult other writers in print, or get drunk on the job. Basically, HR's worst nightmare. And the marriage. Oh boy. Poe married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia Clem, when he was 27. Yep, you heard that right. Even for the 1800s, that was sketchy. People tried to excuse it as different times, but let's be real, it was weird. Some historians say it was pure love. Others think it was more like having an emotional support cousin. Either way, he adored her. When she died of tuberculosis, Poe basically unraveled. He poured every ounce of grief and madness into his stories. Think of it as the 1800s version of a sad boy playlist. Except his playlist was The Raven. When Poe finally leaned into writing full-time, it wasn't sunshine and roses. It was death, ravens, and corpses. While other poets were out there writing about nature, love, and sunsets, Poe was like, what if the sunset was bleeding out and the birds spoke Latin? His most famous piece, The Raven, 1845, made him a household name. But, fun fact, he was only paid about $9 for it. Yep, one of the most quoted poems in the world, and Poe basically got gas money. But where did his twisted imagination come from? Part of it was obsession. Poe had a thing for death. Not just because everyone he loved kept dying, which they did, but because he was fascinated with the idea of being buried alive. Legit, he wrote about it so much people thought he had a personal coffin subscription. His short stories, like The Premature Burial, weren't just creepy tales. They were him working through his worst fear in print. Another secret? Poe loved cryptography. He'd slip puzzles into his writings like Easter eggs, daring readers to solve them. The guy basically invented Gothic escape rooms on paper. And let's not forget, his personal life was chaos fuel for his art. Between being broke, losing his wife Virginia to TB, and battling his own demons, his poetry and stories were basically diary entries. If your diary entries included haunted houses and possessed cats.
So when you ask, what strange obsessions shaped his imagination? The answer is death, fear, and puzzles. And what secrets hid in his personal life? That he was quietly bleeding his trauma into some of the darkest, most influential literature ever. Poe's death remains one of the greatest mysteries in literary history. On October 3, 1849, he was found delirious on the streets of Baltimore, wearing someone else's clothes, muttering incoherently. No one knows how he got there or what had happened to him in the missing days before. Some say it was alcohol poisoning. Others whisper it was rabies. There's even a theory that he was a victim of cooping, a voter fraud scheme where gangs kidnapped men, drugged them, forced them to vote multiple times in different disguises, and left them to die. He was taken to Washington College Hospital, but he never regained enough strength to explain what had happened. 4 days later, Edgar Allan Poe was gone. His last words? "Lord help my poor soul." And with that, he left the world with questions that have never been answered. Why was he in Baltimore at all? Who was he with? And why did his end mirror the very nightmares he wrote about? So, if you ever feel like your life is messy, just remember, at least you won't be found in a stranger's pants, half-conscious, wearing clothes you don't own, with people arguing for 200 years about whether you died of rabies, booze, or just being really bad at life. This was Poe, signing off, until the next mystery.